Well, joining us now is Dan Perry, former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press and international affairs analyst. So, we're seeing these talks that the U.S. and Iran may be moving toward this temporary framework deal, but the demands on Iran's nuclear program remain extremely sweeping here. How realistic do you think it is that Tehran is going to actually agree to terms like a 20-year enrichment halt and dismantling some of these key facilities?
Well, it depends on whether Iran feels it lost the war and whether they're terrified of the campaign resuming and whether they think Trump can even do such a thing. And I fear that the position that the world would like to think, like Iran to think they're in, is not the one they think they're in. They think they have leverage. And if they do have leverage, then they're not going to agree to any of this. So then the question becomes, how can you make them understand that they don't? Is it the blockade? They figure the world can't maintain a blockade because the economic impact of having the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf area be so disrupted is too great for the world to tolerate it for 2 or 3 or 4 months. They assume they can outlast the rest of the world. And also, tragically and very damagingly, when they look at the West, and their antagonist largely is the West, they see a disunified field. And that is the grapes of wrath that the U.S. is being forced to eat from its year and a half of Trump doing everything conceivable to alienate the Europeans and his NATO allies and threatening to invade Denmark, to seize Greenland, and telling them NATO is irrelevant, and then not consulting with them in any way, not even in the most secretive possible fashion before the war. And so I think we're seeing signs in Europe of some recalibration, especially with NATO chief Mark Rutte, suggesting that maybe going forward things might be different. So a lot depends on whether Trump can make up with NATO and present Iran with a unified front.
Right.
But what they're currently seeing, they think they can outlast the West. That's obvious. And it looks like the best case scenario is a deal that ends the Hormuz disaster and ends the blockade, but neither of these things were the case antebellum. So all the U.S. gets for its efforts in the war, other than getting rid of Khamenei and some other miscreants, is a nuclear deal. It probably was attainable before, even if they agree to the terms that your own question suggests are unlikely. And of course, I would like to see the U.S. demand much more, much more. The idea that Iran is going to get billions in a full unfreezing of assets and ending of sanctions by some estimates $100 billion, and that will strengthen a regime to a degree that is overpoweringly demoralizing to the opposition, in exchange just for the nuclear file seems like a bad deal.
Now, we're seeing these new reports coming out from the Washington Post that the CIA has told the Trump administration that it ultimately believes that Iran can withstand this U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz for at least 2 to 4 months. The question is, how desperate is Trump to end this war, to see some type of solution to this problem?
A normal politician would be very desperate because he's not only lost the Democrats and not only down to 30-something% approval, those things are obvious, but he's losing half the Republican Party as well. The war is rather unpopular. And the midterms are coming up, and the Republicans, even without the Iran war, would have had a very difficult time and were likely to lose the House. Now, all indications are they'll lose control of both houses of Congress, and obviously he's facing pressure of the kind that a normal politician would take into account. And it's not just that he cares about his colleagues in the Republican Party. It's that if he loses the House and the Senate, he's going to face impeachment procedures. He's going to face all kinds of obstructionism, and the Democrats are out for blood, headed towards the 2028 election.
Right.
So he presumably doesn't want that. And that would suggest that he is looking for an exit ramp. On the other hand, just like the Iranians quite convincingly at least feign indifference to being completely thrashed and having their economy be completely throttled. And we might believe that's for real, and they actually don't care, because that's how crazy they are. Trump has a version of that himself. It's conceivable, not inconceivable, that he will throw all these rational and normal politician calculations out the window and go with his gut on throttling Iran. I mean, he famously says he can do whatever he wants to do. He says that he can ignore international law. He says, I'm only limited by my sense of morality, I think he said in a recent interview. I don't think he has a lot of principles, but and he certainly doesn't care about democracy in Iran.
Right.
But I think one of his principles is he doesn't want to look like a chump, and Iran is flirting with that outcome here.
Dan, what do you make of the UAE's, you could say, expanding global relationships?
Well, it's very interesting, especially in the context of the UAE leaving OPEC in the past week. They're clearly facing a rupture with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is again becoming closer to Iran. The UAE, of all the countries in the region, is the most open to a very close defense and economic relationship with Israel. Although I was very interested to hear your Bahraini guest suggesting that Bahrain may go the same way.
Right.
Bahrain, by the way, is very interesting because even though they're ruled by a Sunni family, and in general the elites is Sunni, the vast majority of the population is Shiite, with some sympathies for Iran. So they have an internal division that they constantly have to straddle. As for the UAE, they're clearly unhappy with everything about how this has gone. I think if the UAE were speaking very openly, they'd want the war to resume. The UAE is the most clear antagonist in that region to Iran. And I think Iran views them as the weakest link, perhaps unfairly and perhaps incorrectly. But that is why Iran targeted them last week. And I suspect they're quite rattled.
What do you mean by that? Why would you say that they're viewed as the weakest link? What about the UAE would make Iran think that?
I think they're figuring that the UAE might be reluctant to enter a direct war with Iran because they're so close, so close. The most Mickey Mouse of missiles from Iran can reach the UAE, and their entire business model is based on, well, A, low taxes, and B, the idea that they're tremendously nice assets on a otherwise a sandlot are not being bombarded by jihadist maniacs. So they have built a tremendous business on this, and they've become basically a Western country with 90% of the population being foreign, not all of it Western, but 90% is foreign, based on the idea that none of this is happening. That is not as profoundly true for any of the other countries, not even for Qatar. The other countries are not nearly as vulnerable. If you look at the UAE realistically, it's a series of towns, cities, not that far from each other. Abu Dhabi and Dubai in particular, but also Sharjah, on a strip of land that is 30 miles from Iran. They're so incredibly vulnerable. Are they really going to risk upsetting the Americans by restarting the war? Are they going to go to war with Iran? I think Iran figured they can really rattle everyone's nerves by striking at the UAE. And by the way, they didn't fire at the Burj Khalifa or even at the airport as they did during the war. It was unclear what they fired at, some assets, no one was hurt. They were making a point. I don't think the UAE likes having such a point being made because when your main concern really is your business plan, markets can be rattled by that kind of saber rattling.
Would you say there has been somewhat of a shift in terms of what could be the future of relations between Israel and Lebanon as a result of these talks?
Yeah, but it's been stymied by lack of international will and some foolishness, I fear, from Israel. It's nothing new that the Christian minority in Lebanon would like to have peace with Israel and basically is quite sympathetic to Israel and vice versa. The brothers Jamayel were willing to do peace 45 years ago and that failed because of everyone else's opposition and for fear of Hezbollah. So little has changed. Now, what's different is that in the wake of Israel's victory over Hezbollah in the fall of 2024, the new government under Joseph Aoun was willing to say things that previous governments for the past 4 decades have not been willing to, which suggested some courage because they thought Hezbollah had been weakened. But right now, nothing will happen unless Hezbollah is disarmed. Israel clearly will not go to the north of Lebanon and chase them up there, occupy the whole country, so that can't be. They don't want Syria's help, although that actually weirdly is tantalizing. I get mocked for this, but the only way it's going to work is to have an international force of Arabs and Europeans and Americans and others go in there. No one wants to do that, but if they don't do that, then Lebanon will continue to be an Iranian protectorate through Hezbollah, and all this goodwill will be wasted. Now, why do I say Israel is dropping the ball a little bit? There was talk of Joseph Aoun, a very friendly potential Christian president of Lebanon, meeting Netanyahu. It's no longer possible for him because of the way Israel has carried itself about in this past month and a half since Hezbollah attacked Israel in the wake of the Israeli attack on Iran. There's too much indifference coming from Israel to civilian damage in Lebanon. There have been too many episodes of soldiers misbehaving. There have been too many Israeli officials, like the firebrand Defense Minister Israel Katz making threats against Lebanese infrastructure and the very government that would be electrifying in its willingness to make peace with Israel if only it were made politically palatable for them. That's where we are.
What kind of punishments can we expect from the IDF at this point when it comes to cases like this? And how is it possible that we are seeing cases like this in the first place?
Every country has idiots, and Israel's no exception. So you have 10, 11 million Israelis, there's going to be a lot of fools that are capable of doing such a thing. This is a breakdown in military discipline. It clearly was a failure to communicate to the soldiers that they need to be respectful of the areas they are, in effect, temporarily occupying. It can only be handled after the fact with extremely, extremely harsh disciplinary measures. Now, the army will tell you, I suppose, that it has other fish to fry. The public mood in Israel is sort of to view the soldiers as heroes after 2.5 years of terrible war, not to be punishing them for the occasional misbehavior. But of course, we know that it's not just a matter of the desecration of religious symbols in a country that should be Israel's friend in short order, if only circumstances allow, but also the behavior in Gaza, extremely vulgar and disrespectful videos that have come out that made Israel look terrible. And in each case of those, I could see them after, vehiculating all over social media. The reputational damage to Israel is stupendous. And I fear at some point, if the education has failed, then you have to go with extreme punishment.
Right.
And there's no other way to handle it.
Right. And I want to talk about what punishment actually looks like typically in cases like this.
Fairly brief prison sentences, basically. And I think they need to, at best, and or worst. But, you know, you have to look also not just at such cases of terrible behavior that causes reputational damage, but also if you look at investigations of soldiers or indeed of radical settlers after incidents in the West Bank that led to fatalities that can't be justified on the Palestinian side. Israel has not covered itself in glory in this regard. Now, I know the situation is complex. And I know the soldiers face a threat to their lives in many cases. And I know that what looks like a civilian in the West Bank might not be a civilian, and definitely so in Gaza. All this is clear, but the appearance, at least, of a light trigger finger and of leniency on the part of the Israeli justice system is also clear, and it attaches to politics. It wasn't this way when Israel did not have a government where there were ministers who were very much of a piece with the political movements from which all this behavior springs. I want to express myself cautiously, but maybe Finance Minister Smotrich might conceivably be one of the people who is indifferent to such activity. It's a bad situation, and it's incredibly damaging. And whenever I speak on Arab television, for example, and in general to groups that are unsympathetic towards Israel, and attempt to communicate the type of bile and nihilistic violence that Israel faces from its jihadist enemies, you always hear about these cases. Well, what about these soldiers that chanted this horrible thing? What about this minister that said we have to do this, that, and the other? I don't even want to repeat what some ministers have said. And you try to explain what I just said before, that Israel has almost 11 million people and way too many ministers, and not all of them are Euripides, and there's clearly no discipline. But my only message can be that the damage is incalculable.
Right.
And so someone has to clamp down. I've lost all hope for this government doing very much in that regard, both in public diplomacy and in internal discipline.
Yeah.
If there is a new government within months, then I am fairly confident they will take Israel's international reputation and legal standing as something that needs to be handled with greater care.
We shall see. All right, Dan Perry, our international affairs analyst, thank you so much for joining us in the studio.